I was halfway through a beer in a dusty cafe in Kabul when my phone buzzed with a message that made me nearly spit out my drink. My property manager, Derek, had sent 3 words that would change everything. We have problems. I had been working overseas as a private security consultant for the past 6 months, stationed in Afghanistan helping train local security forces. The pay was excellent, the work was meaningful, and I had been looking forward to returning to my cabin in the mountains outside Boulder, Colorado in another 2 months. My cabin was my sanctuary, a place I had bought 5 years ago after saving every penny I could. It sat on 3 acres of pristine land, surrounded by pine trees, with a view of the Rockies that made every mortgage payment worth it. The cabin was technically part of an HOA, though I had been assured when I bought the place that it was one of those minimal involvement associations. They maintained the 2 miles of private road leading into our small community of 12 properties, organized an annual meeting, and that was supposed to be it. Dues were $200 a year. I paid them on time, kept my property neat, and never had any issues. Until now. I called Derek immediately, not caring that it was 3 a.m. Colorado time. He answered on the second ring, sounding wide awake and stressed. "Trevor, man, I'm so sorry. I just found out about this today." "Found out about what?" I asked, feeling my jaw clench. "There is a woman living in your cabin. She says the HOA gave her permission to stay there while you were gone." I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. The few other patrons in the cafe looked over, but I did not care. "What? Who? How did she even get in?" "Her name is Karren Edwards. She is the new HOA president. Apparently she took over about 3 months ago when old Mr. Patterson retired and moved to Arizona. She claims there is some bylaw about unoccupied properties becoming available for temporary housing for HOA members in good standing." "That is complete garbage," I said, my voice rising. "I have never heard of any such rule. And my cabin is not unoccupied. It is my home. I am just working overseas." I know, Derek said. "I went up there today to check on things like usual. I do the walkthrough every 2 weeks like you asked. I show up and there is a car in your driveway. A silver Lexus SUV with one of those stick-figure family stickers on the back. I thought maybe you had let a friend stay there or something. But then this woman answers your door like she owns the place." My hands were shaking. "What did she say?" "She was incredibly rude, told me I was trespassing and needed to leave immediately. I explained I was your property manager and had every right to be there. She said that as HOA president, she had authority over all properties in the community, and that since you had been gone for months without properly notifying the HOA board, your cabin had been deemed available for temporary occupancy. She showed me some paperwork that looked official, but Trevor, I do not think any of it is legal." "It is not legal," I said firmly. "You cannot just move into someone else's house because they are away. That is breaking and entering. That is trespassing. That is probably a dozen other crimes." I told her she needed to leave. She refused. She said if I did not leave her property, she would call the police and have me arrested. I left because I did not want to escalate things until I talked to you. But Trevor, she has made herself completely at home. I could see through the window that she has moved furniture around. There were different curtains up. She is acting like it is her place." I pressed my palm against my forehead, trying to think through the rage clouding my brain. Okay. I need you to call the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. Explain the situation. She is trespassing in my home. I want her removed immediately. I can do that first thing in the morning. It is almost 4 here now. Do it as soon as they open. And Derek, I am coming home. I need to sort out my exit here, but I will be on a flight within 48 hours. "I will handle everything I can from this end," Derek promised. "I'm so sorry, man. I had no idea this was happening. She must have moved in right after my last check 2 weeks ago." After I hung up, I sat back down and tried to process what I had just learned. Some random woman had decided my home was now hers just because I was overseas working. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately started making calls to my supervisor, explaining that I had a family emergency and needed to return to the States immediately. Given that my contract was up in less than 2 months anyway, they were understanding and agreed to let me go after a brief transition period of 3 days. Those 3 days were torture. I kept in constant contact with Derek, who reported that the sheriff's office had been less helpful than we hoped. They sent a deputy out to the cabin, but Karren had shown him the HOA documents she claimed gave her authority. The deputy said it looked like a civil matter, not a criminal one, and that we would need to sort it out through the courts or the HOA itself. He suggested I contact a lawyer. I did exactly that. From my small room in Kabul, I had a video consultation with an attorney named Mitchell Harrison from a firm in Boulder. He looked at the photos Derek had taken of the documents Karren showed him, and his expression grew darker with each page. "This is fraudulent," Mitchell said bluntly. "I pulled the HOA bylaws for your community. They are public record. There is no provision for anything like what she is claiming. The HOA has authority over exterior property maintenance, common areas, and architectural changes. They have zero authority to declare a property vacant and assign it to someone else. That would violate about 100 property laws." "So what do?" I asked. "First, you file a police report for trespassing and burglary. The sheriff's office should have taken this more seriously. Second, we file an emergency restraining order to have her removed from the property. Third, we go after her both civilly and criminally. If she is falsifying HOA documents, that is fraud. If she broke into your home, that is burglary. We have a strong case." "Do whatever it takes," I told him. "I want her out of my home and I want her to face consequences for this." Mitchell got to work immediately. By the time I boarded my flight from Kabul to Dubai, and then Dubai to New York, and finally New York to Denver, he had already filed multiple motions with the court. Derek picked me up from Denver International Airport, and I could see the stress on his face as I threw my duffel bag into the back of his truck. "She is still there," he said without preamble. "The restraining order hearing is tomorrow morning. Judge wants to hear from both sides before making a decision." "Tomorrow morning," I repeated. "So she gets to spend one more night in my bed, in my home, while I have to get a hotel." "You can stay with me," Derek offered. "My couch is comfortable." I appreciated the offer, but I was too wound up. "Thanks, but I will get a hotel. I need to be alone to think." I checked into a Holiday Inn near Boulder and spent the night pacing, going over everything in my head. How had this happened? How had someone looked at my property and decided it was theirs for the taking? And how had the initial police response been so useless? The next morning, I met Mitchell at the Boulder County Courthouse. He was a sharp-looking man in his 40s, with graying hair and the demeanor of someone who had seen every trick in the book. "She will be here with her own attorney," Mitchell warned me. "Be prepared for her to lie, to twist things, to play the victim. People like this are often very good at manipulation." "I am prepared," I said, though my hands were clenched into fists. When Karren Edwards walked into the courtroom, I felt my blood pressure spike. She was exactly what I had pictured, a woman in her early 50s with an angular face, highlighted blonde hair styled in that specific suburban cut, and an expression that somehow managed to look both smug and victimized at the same time. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit and carried a leather folder that I assumed held her fraudulent documents. Her attorney was a younger man who looked uncomfortable, as if he was already regretting taking this case. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Morrison, called the hearing to order. Mitchell presented our case first, laying out the facts clearly. I owned the property, I had been overseas for work, I had a property manager checking on the place regularly, and Karren had moved in without permission based on fabricated HOA authority. When it was Karren's turn, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before speaking. "Your Honor, I understand Mr. Quinn is upset, but he has to understand that as HOA president, I have a responsibility to the community. His property was sitting empty for months. We had no way to reach him. The grass was getting long, there were concerns about pipes freezing, and the community bylaws clearly state that abandoned properties." "The property was not abandoned," Mitchell interrupted. "Mr. Quinn employed a property manager who visited bi-weekly. The mortgage was current, utilities were paid. There was absolutely no indication of abandonment." Karren's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, if I may, the HOA bylaws do contain provisions about property maintenance and community standards. Ms. Edwards may have been overzealous in her interpretation, but her intentions were to protect property values for all homeowners." "Her intentions were to steal a house," I said loudly, unable to contain myself. Judge Morrison gave me a sharp look. "Mr. Quinn, please let your attorney speak for you." I nodded, chastened but still furious. The judge turned to Karren. "Ms. Edwards, do you have documentation showing that the HOA board voted to approve your occupancy of Mr. Quinn's property?" Karren shuffled through her folder. "Well, Your Honor, as president, I have the authority to make emergency decisions for the good of the community." That was not my question. "Do you have board meeting minutes showing a vote?" There was not a formal vote, but do you have any written communication from Mr. Quinn giving you permission to enter or occupy his property? "No, but we tried to contact him." "Ms. Edwards," Judge Morrison said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "did you break into Mr. Quinn's home?" "I used the HOA master key," Karren said defensively. "We have keys to all properties for emergencies." "Was there an emergency?" "The property was unattended." "Was there a fire, a flood, a break-in? Any actual emergency?" Karren pressed her lips together. "No, Your Honor, but—" "Then you entered Mr. Quinn's private property without permission and without cause. That is trespassing at minimum." Judge Morrison looked down at the papers in front of her. "I am issuing an immediate order for you to vacate the property, Ms. Edwards. You have until 5 o'clock this evening to remove yourself and all your belongings. If you are not gone by then, the sheriff's office will remove you. Do you understand?" Karren's face flushed red. "This is outrageous. I am being punished for trying to help the community. Mr. Quinn abandoned his property." "Mr. Quinn did no such thing, and if you continue to make false statements in my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand my order?" Karren looked like she wanted to argue more, but her attorney put a hand on her arm and whispered something to her. She gave a tight nod. "Good," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Quinn, you are authorized to change all locks on your property immediately. Ms. Edwards, you are prohibited from entering Mr. Quinn's property for any reason. If there are HOA matters that require discussion, they will be handled through proper legal channels." She banged her gavel. "We are adjourned." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was tempered by anger. This should never have happened in the first place. As we walked out of the courtroom, Karren shot me a look of pure hatred. "This is not over," she hissed as she passed me. "Yes, it is," Mitchell said firmly, "and if you contact my client or approach his property again, we will seek additional charges. You should be consulting with a criminal defense attorney, Ms. Edwards, because breaking and entering is a crime." We left her sputtering in the hallway. Derek met us in the parking lot. "How did it go?" "She has to be out by 5, I said. "I want to be there to make sure she actually leaves. Can you get a locksmith out there today?" "Already called one. He can be there at 6. I nodded. Mitchell handed me his card. "Call me if she gives you any trouble. I'm also going to file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office about the fraud and trespassing. This woman should not get away with this." At 4 o'clock, Derek and I drove up the winding private road to my cabin. My heart clenched when I saw it. The place looked the same from the outside, but knowing that someone had violated my space made it feel tainted somehow. Karren's Lexus was still in the driveway. I checked my watch. She had 1 hour. We waited in Derek's truck, watching. At 4:45, the front door opened and Karren emerged with a suitcase. She loaded it into her car, then went back inside. Over the next 15 minutes, she made several trips carrying boxes and bags. I noticed she was taking her time, clearly trying to wait until the last possible second. At 4:58, she finally got into her car. But instead of leaving, she sat there, staring at the cabin. At 5:01, I got out of the truck and walked toward her car. She rolled down her window. "You need to leave," I said, keeping my voice level. "Now. I just want you to know that you have made an enemy today," Karren said coldly. "I am still the HOA president. I still have authority over this community. You think you can just come back here and everything will go back to normal? I will make your life miserable. Every little violation, every blade of grass too high, every tiny infraction of the HOA rules, I will be on you. You will regret crossing me." I leaned down slightly, looking her in the eye. "You broke into my house and tried to steal it. I am not the one who should be worried about making enemies. Now, get off my property before I call the sheriff." She glared at me for another long moment, then started her car and drove away, kicking up gravel as she went. Derek joined me as I watched her taillights disappear down the road. That was intense. "She's not going to let this go," I said quietly. "You heard her. She's going to try to make my life hell through the HOA. "Then we fight back," Derek said. "Come on, let's see what damage she did inside." I unlocked the front door with my key, half expecting her to have changed the locks herself. The door swung open and I stepped inside my home for the first time in 6 months. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was not my smell. She had candles burning, some kind of vanilla lavender scent that I hated. The furniture in the living room had been rearranged. My couch was against a different wall. My bookshelf had been moved. There were her decorative pillows on my couch, her magazines on my coffee table. I walked through the cabin, cataloging everything. She had been sleeping in my bed. My sheets were gone, replaced with some floral pattern that made my teeth clench. The bathroom had her toiletries still scattered on the counter. She had even put up different shower curtains. In the kitchen, my refrigerator was full of her food. She had rearranged my cabinets, putting dishes and glasses in different places. There was a corkboard on the wall that had not been there before, covered with her photos and notes. "She redecorated," Derek said in disbelief. "She actually tried to make your place her own." I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of everything. "Evidence," I said. "Mitchell's going to need all of this." We spent the next 2 hours documenting everything and making a list of what she had left behind. There was a lot. It was clear she had not been planning to leave any time soon. She had moved in as if this was permanent. The locksmith arrived at 6 and changed all the locks, including the ones on the garage and the shed out back. I asked him to install deadbolts as well, good ones that could not be easily picked or bypassed. After he left, Derek and I packed up all of Karren's remaining belongings into boxes and put them on the front porch. I sent her a text from a new number I had set up just for this purpose, telling her she had 24 hours to collect her things or I would donate them. She did not respond. That night, sleeping in my own bed with new sheets I had picked up from Target, I should have felt relieved. I was home. The crazy HOA lady was gone. But I could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I was right. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a notice of violation. According to Karren, my grass was 1 inch too high, violating HOA standards. There was a fine of $100, due immediately. I walked out to my front yard and measured the grass. It was 3 inches high. The HOA limit was 4 inches. I took pictures with a ruler visible in the shot and sent them to Mitchell. 2 days after that, another violation notice. This time, I was cited for having an unauthorized vehicle parked in my driveway. The vehicle in question was Derek's truck, which he had parked there while helping me clean out the last of Karren's things. The notices kept coming. I was cited for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-trash day, even though trash day was the next morning and the HOA guidelines specifically allowed cans to be put out the evening before. I was cited for having a damaged fence that needed repair. The fence was not damaged. I was cited for having outdoor lights that were too bright, even though they were the same lights that had been there for 5 years. Every single citation came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200. Mitchell advised me not to pay any of them and to document everything. He filed a complaint with the HOA board, requesting a hearing to address the harassment. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the violations kept piling up. Karren even started showing up at my property unannounced, claiming she was conducting HOA inspections. The first time, I told her to leave. The second time, I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who responded told her she could not harass me, but he also said that as HOA president, she did have a right to inspect properties from the street or common areas for violations. "She cannot come onto your property without permission," the deputy explained, "but she can observe it from public spaces." It was a small comfort, but it meant Karren started parking on the road near my driveway and taking pictures with a zoom lens. It was creepy and invasive, but technically legal. I started documenting her behavior as well. Every time she showed up, I took photos and videos. I recorded the dates and times. Mitchell assured me we were building a strong case for harassment. The HOA hearing finally arrived. It was held at a community center in Boulder in a small conference room. The board consisted of 5 members: Karren as president, a man named Richard Edwards who I learned was her husband, a younger woman named Stephanie Martinez, an older man named Gerald Foster, and a middle-aged woman named Linda Chen. I attended with Mitchell. Derek came as well, to provide testimony about Karren's behavior. Karren called the meeting to order with a smug expression. We are here to address multiple violations by Mr. Trevor Quinn of the community bylaws and standards. Mr. Quinn has received numerous citations over the past 3 weeks and has refused to pay the associated fines or correct the violations. Mitchell stood. Before we proceed, I would like to address the composition of this board. It is my understanding that Richard Edwards is married to Karren Edwards. This presents a clear conflict of interest in any matter involving Mr. Quinn, given the ongoing legal dispute between him and Ms. Edwards. Richard, a balding man with a red face, bristled. I am a duly elected board member. I have every right to be here. You are married to someone who is actively being investigated for breaking into my client's home, Mitchell said. Your participation in this hearing is inappropriate and potentially illegal under Colorado HOA statutes. Gerald Foster spoke up. He had a gentle voice and kind eyes. He has a point, Richard. Maybe you should recuse yourself from this particular matter. I will do no such thing, Richard snapped. Judge Morrison's order had been clear, and Mitchell had filed complaints with the district attorney's office, but so far, no criminal charges had been filed against Karren. The DA's office had said they were investigating, but these things took time. Mitchell turned to the other board members. I am formally requesting that this hearing be postponed until an independent review of the HOA board's conduct can be completed. Ms. Edwards has engaged in a clear pattern of harassment against Mr. Quinn, filing false violation reports and abusing her authority as president. These violations are not false, Karren said sharply. Everything is documented with photos and dates. Photos that misrepresent the actual conditions, Mitchell countered. He pulled out a folder. For example, the violation for grass height. The HOA limit is 4 inches. Mr. Quinn's grass measured 3 inches at the time of the citation. Here are time-stamped photos with measurements. He went through each violation, methodically dismantling Karren's claims. The unauthorized vehicle was a guest, which was explicitly allowed. The trash cans were put out within the permitted time frame. The fence was not damaged. The lights were the same ones that had been approved years ago. I watched the other board members as Mitchell presented his case. Stephanie looked uncomfortable. Gerald was frowning. Linda was taking notes. Only Karren and Richard seemed unmoved. When Mitchell finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Linda spoke. Karren, these do seem like overreach. I mean, if his grass was under the limit, why did you cite him? I measured it myself, Karren insisted. It was over 4 inches. When did you measure it? Mitchell asked. The day I filed the report. And Mr. Quinn's photos from that same day show it was 3 inches. One of you is lying. Given that Ms. Edwards has already been found by a judge to have trespassed on Mr. Quinn's property and made false claims about HOA authority, I think we know who the credible party is here. Karren's face went red. How dare you? I dare because you broke the law, Mitchell said calmly. And now you are abusing your position to harass my client in retaliation for him exercising his legal rights. This is not just inappropriate, it is potentially criminal. Harassment, stalking, abuse of authority, fraud. We are documenting everything. Gerald cleared his throat. I think we need to table this discussion and have a separate board meeting to address these concerns, without Ms. Edwards present. You cannot do that, Karren said, her voice rising. I am the president. You are also the subject of these complaints, Gerald said gently but firmly. It is not appropriate for you to preside over your own case. Stephanie nodded. I agree. We need to bring in someone from outside to mediate this, maybe someone from the state HOA oversight office. Colorado does not have strong HOA oversight, Mitchell interjected, but I would suggest that the board consider removing Ms. Edwards from her position pending the resolution of the criminal investigation into her conduct. There is no criminal investigation, Karren said quickly, too quickly. Actually, the Boulder County District Attorney's Office confirmed to me yesterday that they are actively investigating the break-in and the falsification of HOA documents, Mitchell said. So yes, there is. The room went silent. I saw Richard reach for Karren's hand under the table. Linda spoke up. I was not aware that Karren had been using falsified documents. Karren, is this true? Did you create fake HOA bylaws to justify moving into Mr. Quinn's cabin? I did not falsify anything, Karren said, but her voice lacked conviction. I interpreted the existing bylaws. You made up a rule that does not exist, I said, unable to stay quiet any longer. You broke into my house and moved in like it was yours. And when you got caught, instead of apologizing or trying to make it right, you have spent the last month trying to destroy me with fake violations. You are a bully and a criminal. You do not get to speak to me like that, Karren hissed. Actually, I do, because you violated my rights, my property, and my peace of mind. And I am going to make sure everyone in this community knows exactly what you did. Gerald stood up. I am calling for a vote to suspend Karren Edwards from her position as HOA president pending the outcome of the investigation and a full board review of her conduct. All in favor? Gerald raised his hand. So did Stephanie and Linda. That is 3 votes, Gerald said. Karren, Richard, you are both expected to recuse yourselves from this vote. This is illegal, Richard sputtered. You cannot just remove her. We are not removing her, we are suspending her temporarily, Linda said. It is well within the board's authority under our actual bylaws. I checked. Karren stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You are all going to regret this. Every single one of you. I built this HOA. I have dedicated years to this community, and this is how you repay me? By siding with some man who abandoned his property for half a year? I did not abandon anything, I said firmly. I was working, legally, with a property manager checking on my home regularly. You just decided you wanted my cabin and tried to take it. Karren grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Richard followed, shooting angry looks at the rest of the board. After they left, Gerald sighed heavily. I'm so sorry, Mr. Quinn. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. Karren took over as president when Harold moved to Arizona, and at first she seemed fine. Maybe a little strict about rules, but nothing like this. When did she move into your cabin? Stephanie asked. According to my property manager, he found her there about 6 months into my deployment. She had been there for 3 days at that point. Linda shook her head. 3 days. She must have been watching, waiting for Derek to do his check, and then moved in right after, knowing she had 2 weeks before he came back. That is premeditated, Gerald said. That is not some misunderstanding or overzealous enforcement. She planned this. We talked for another hour, going over everything that had happened. The board members were genuinely shocked and apologetic. Gerald agreed to take over as interim president, and they promised to dismiss all the bogus fines and violations. They also agreed to formally censure Karren in the HOA records and to recommend to the full membership that she be removed from the board entirely. It felt like a victory, but I knew it was not over. Karren had threatened to make my life hell, and she seemed like the type to follow through. I was right again. 2 weeks later, I woke up to find my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted obscenities across it and knocked it off its post. I called the sheriff's office and filed a report. The deputy who responded took photos and said he would check if any neighbors had security cameras that might have caught the vandal. A few days after that, I found nails scattered across my driveway. If I had not been walking to my car instead of driving out of the garage, I would have run right over them. More sheriff's reports. Then, my internet service was mysteriously disconnected. When I called the provider, they said they had received a request from the account holder to cancel the service. I was the account holder. I had not made any such request. It took 3 days to get it sorted out, and the service rep eventually told me the cancellation had been called in by a woman who claimed to be my wife. I was not married. Mitchell advised me to get security cameras, so I installed a full system around the cabin. Front door, back door, driveway, and perimeter cameras. Within a week, they paid off. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera app and saw a figure in dark clothing approaching my front door. They were carrying something. I watched as they set it down on my porch, lit something, and ran. Fire. I called 911 immediately and grabbed my fire extinguisher, running outside in my sweatpants and t-shirt. The flames were small, just some papers and cardboard that had been set on fire in a box. I sprayed it down with the extinguisher, then waited for the fire department and sheriff to arrive. The fire marshal examined the scene and confirmed it was arson. "Someone set this deliberately," he said. "You are lucky you caught it early. If this had caught on your porch or reached your door, it could have been bad." The sheriff's deputy reviewed my security footage. The person's face was not visible, but their build and gait looked familiar to me. "That is a woman," I said, pointing at the screen. "See the way she moves and the height? That looks like Karren Edwards." "Can you positively identify her?" the deputy asked. "Not from this footage, no, but who else would do this? She has been harassing me for weeks." The deputy promised to investigate, but warned me that without a clear identification, it would be hard to press charges. The next morning, Mitchell filed for a restraining order against Karren on my behalf, citing the pattern of harassment, the vandalism, and now the arson. The hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, I did not feel safe in my own home. I had been through war zones, had been shot at, had faced down people who genuinely wanted to kill me. But this was different. This was my sanctuary being violated over and over again. I barely slept, jumping at every sound. Derek offered to stay with me for a few nights, and I accepted. Having someone else in the house helped me relax enough to get a few hours of sleep. The restraining order hearing was intense. Karren showed up with a different attorney, a woman who seemed much more competent than the first one. They argued that there was no proof Karren had been involved in any of the vandalism or harassment, and that my accusations were baseless and retaliatory. Mitchell presented the pattern of behavior, the break-in, the fake violations, the harassment, the suspicious timing of all the incidents. He showed the security footage from the arson attempt and pointed out how the figure's build matched Karren's. The judge, a different one this time, listened carefully. Finally, he spoke. "Ms. Edwards, I'm going to issue a temporary restraining order. You're to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Quinn and his property at all times. You're not to contact him directly or indirectly. This order will remain in effect pending a full hearing in 30 days, at which point we will determine if a permanent order is warranted." "This is outrageous," Karren's attorney said. "My client is being accused without any concrete evidence." "Your client has a documented history of trespassing on Mr. Quinn's property and abusing her authority as HOA president," the judge interrupted. "The temporary order is a reasonable precaution given the circumstances. Ms. Edwards, do you understand this order?" Karren nodded stiffly, not making eye contact with anyone. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. A restraining order was not a guarantee of safety, but it was something. Over the next 2 weeks, things were quiet. No vandalism, no harassment, no surprise visits. I started to relax, thinking maybe Karren had finally gotten the message. Then I got a call from Gerald Foster. "Trevor, we need to talk. Can you come to my house?" I drove over to Gerald's place, a nice ranch-style home about a mile from my cabin. He invited me in and offered me coffee, which I accepted. "What's going on?" I asked. Gerald looked uncomfortable. "I've been going through HOA records, trying to sort out the mess Karren left behind. Trevor, she has been embezzling money from the HOA. I nearly dropped my coffee cup." "What?" "The HOA account should have about $20,000 in it. We have been collecting dues for years and we have minimal expenses, just road maintenance, insurance, and some landscaping for the common areas. But the account only has $3,000. $17,000 is missing." "And you think Karren took it?" "I found records of transfers to an account in her name. She tried to disguise them as payments to vendors, but the vendor names are fake. I looked them up. They do not exist. The money went straight to her personal account." I sat back, processing this. That is a felony. That is serious. "I know. I have already contacted our HOA attorney, and he is advising us to report this to the district attorney's office immediately. But I wanted to tell you first, and since you have been dealing with so much from her already. Thank you for telling me. And yes, absolutely report it. She needs to face consequences for everything she has done." Gerald filed the report the next day. The district attorney's office, which had been moving slowly on the trespassing and fraud case, suddenly kicked into high gear when embezzlement was added to the list. Financial crimes got attention. Within a week, Karren was arrested. I was not there to see it, but Derek was. He called me immediately. Trevor, they just took her away in handcuffs. There were 3 sheriff's vehicles at her house. Richard was yelling at the deputies, threatening to sue everyone. Good, I said. I felt a grim satisfaction. Finally, she was facing real consequences. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested for embezzlement and fraud was the headline. The article detailed how Karren had stolen money from the HOA, created fake documents to justify moving into a homeowner's property, and then engaged in a harassment campaign when caught. My name was kept out of the article, but everyone in the community knew it was me. I started getting calls and visits from neighbors, most of whom I barely knew. They apologized for not speaking up sooner, for not realizing what was happening. Several said they had noticed Karren's behavior becoming more erratic and controlling over the months, but had not wanted to get involved. One neighbor, an older woman named Dorothy, told me that Karren had tried to fine her for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. She said only pastels were allowed, and I had red geraniums. I told her there was no such rule, and she got so angry. She threatened to put a lien on my house over flowers. I pulled them out just to avoid the conflict, but I always felt terrible about it. She was a bully, I said. And bullies count on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. The criminal case moved forward. Karren was charged with burglary, trespassing, fraud, embezzlement, and arson. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Mitchell advised the DA's office that we wanted the case to go to trial. Karren had not shown any remorse, had not apologized, and had actively tried to destroy my life. I wanted her to face a jury. The trial was scheduled for 4 months later. In the meantime, the HOA held a special election to permanently remove Karren from the board and elect new officers. Gerald was elected president, Linda became vice president, and 2 new members joined to replace Karren and Richard, who resigned. One of the first acts of the new board was to formally apologize to me and to reimburse me for all the legal fees I had incurred fighting Karren's harassment. They also passed new bylaws to prevent any single board member from having too much authority and to require multiple approvals for any action involving individual properties. The restraining order was made permanent after Karren's arrest. She was released on bail with conditions that included staying away from the entire HOA community, which meant she and Richard had to move. They put their house up for sale, and it sold within a month. I never saw either of them again in person, only in court. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, the fake HOA documents, the testimony from Derek and me about finding her in my cabin, the pattern of false violations, the embezzlement records, and the security footage from the arson attempt. A forensic analysis of the footage had been done, and an expert testified that the person's gait and build were consistent with Karren's. Karren's defense was weak. Her attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who had made some mistakes in judgment, but had never intended to harm anyone. The jury did not buy it. Mitchell put me on the stand, and I told my story from beginning to end. I talked about coming home from serving overseas to find someone had moved into my house. I described the violation of privacy, the stress, the fear when someone set fire to my porch. I explained how I had just wanted to come home to peace after months in a war zone, and instead, I had found myself fighting a different kind of battle. The prosecutor asked me, "Mr. Quinn, did Ms. Edwards ever apologize to you for moving into your home without permission?" "No," I said. "She never apologized. She never acknowledged that what she did was wrong. Instead, she tried to punish me for standing up for myself." When the verdict came back, I was sitting in the courtroom with Derek and Mitchell. The jury found Karren guilty on all counts. I watched as her face crumpled, as she started crying. Richard, sitting behind her in the gallery, put his face in his hands. Sentencing was set for a month later. Mitchell explained that given the severity of the crimes, especially the embezzlement and arson, Karren was likely facing significant prison time. She could get anywhere from 5 to 15 years, depending on how the judge decides to run the sentences, Mitchell said. The embezzlement alone is a Class 3 felony in Colorado, which carries 2 to 6 years. Add in the burglary, fraud, and arson, and it stacks up quickly. At the sentencing hearing, the judge was stern. "Ms. Edwards, you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected to serve your neighbors, to maintain common areas and uphold reasonable standards. Instead, you abused that authority in shocking ways. You broke into a man's home and attempted to steal it through fabricated documents. When caught, you engaged in harassment, vandalism, and ultimately arson. You also stole $17,000 from your community. These are not minor lapses in judgment. These are serious crimes that show a pattern of entitlement and disregard for others. Karren's attorney made a plea for leniency, citing her previously clean record and her contributions to the community. The judge was unmoved. Ms. Edwards, I'm sentencing you to 8 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections. This will be followed by 3 years of supervised parole. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to Mr. Quinn for his legal fees and damages and to the HOA for the embezzled funds. That total comes to $73,000. I felt a weight lift off my chest. 8 years. She would actually serve time for what she had done. As the bailiff led Karren away, she turned and looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in her eyes, just anger. She still thought she was the victim in all this. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into bright Colorado sunshine. Derek was waiting for me outside. "It is over," he said. Yeah, I agreed. It is finally over. We went to a bar in Boulder and had a beer, toasting to justice and to being able to move on with life. Mitchell joined us later, and we spent a few hours just decompressing, talking about anything other than HOAs and legal battles. Over the following months, my life slowly returned to normal. I got a new job with a private security firm that was based in Colorado, so I did not have to go overseas anymore. I could sleep in my own bed every night, in my cabin that finally felt like mine again. The HOA under Gerald's leadership was everything it was supposed to be. Minimal, reasonable, focused on actual community needs rather than petty control. We had quarterly meetings instead of constant harassment. The roads were maintained, the common areas were kept up, and people were left alone to live their lives. I became friendly with several of my neighbors, including Dorothy, who invited me over for dinner and regaled me with stories about the neighborhood before Karren had taken over. Apparently, it had been a quiet, peaceful place where everyone got along. Karren had changed that dynamic within months of becoming president. She'd always been a bit difficult, Dorothy told me, but when she got that title, it was like something switched in her brain. Suddenly she was on a power trip, making up rules and threatening people. I think she genuinely believed she had authority over all of us. Some people should never have even a little bit of power, I said. Ain't that the truth? I also started dating someone, a woman named Jessica, who worked as a nurse in Boulder. She had heard about my story through mutual friends and reached out to see if I wanted to get coffee. That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into a relationship. It was nice to have something positive to focus on after all the chaos. 1 year after Karren's sentencing, I was sitting on my porch, drinking my morning coffee and watching the sunrise over the mountains. My phone rang. It was Mitchell. "Hey Trevor, just wanted to give you an update. The restitution money came through. Karren's assets were liquidated to pay what she owed. You should see a deposit in your account within a few days." "That is good news," I said. I had not been counting on ever seeing that money, honestly. "How much?" "Your portion is $48,000. That covers all your legal fees, the property damage, and some additional compensation for emotional distress that the judge awarded." $48,000. It would not undo what had happened, but it was something. I thanked Mitchell and hung up, staring out at the view I had almost lost. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year and a half. Coming home from Afghanistan to find a stranger in my house, the legal battles, the harassment, the fear, the trial, and the eventual justice. It had been exhausting and infuriating, but it had also taught me something important about standing up for yourself, even when it is hard. Derek stopped by later that afternoon to check on some maintenance issues with the cabin's heating system. We had become close friends through everything. "You know, I was thinking," Derek said as he worked on the furnace, "you could write a book about all this. I bet other people have dealt with crazy HOA situations. It might help them to know they are not alone." "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I just want to forget about it and move on." Fair enough, but Derek's comment stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I started writing down what had happened. just for myself at first. It was cathartic to get it all out, to process everything I'd been through. Eventually, I shared it with Jessica, who encouraged me to publish it online. "People need to know that HOAs can be abused like this," she said, "and they need to know that you can fight back and win." So I posted my story on a popular forum for HOA horror stories. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people who had dealt with similar situations, who were dealing with them currently, who felt powerless against their HOAs. I responded to as many as I could, offering advice based on what Mitchell had taught me. Document everything, know your rights, do not be afraid to get lawyers involved when necessary. Several people reached out privately to ask if I would be willing to consult on their cases. I was not a lawyer, but I could share my experience and point them in the right direction. It felt good to help people who were going through what I had been through. 2 years after Karren's sentencing, I got another call from Mitchell. "Trevor, I thought you would want to know. Karren Edwards is up for early parole consideration. There is going to be a hearing, and victims have the right to submit impact statements or appear in person." My stomach clenched. "Do you think she will get it?" "I doubt it. She has only served 2 years of an 8-year sentence, and from what I understand, her behavior in prison has not been exemplary. She has had multiple disciplinary issues. But the hearing is happening, and I wanted you to have the option to participate if you want." I thought about it for a long time. Did I want to face Karren again? Did I want to relive everything by writing an impact statement? Part of me just wanted to let it go, to continue moving forward with my life. But another part of me knew that if she got out early, she might target me again, or she might target someone else. I decided to submit a written statement. I kept it factual, outlining what she had done and the lasting impact it had on me. I talked about the months of therapy I had gone through to deal with the anxiety and hypervigilance that came from having my home violated. I mentioned the security system I still maintained, the fact that I still did not feel completely safe sometimes. I asked the parole board to consider the seriousness of her crimes and the lack of remorse she had shown. The parole hearing happened without me being present. A week later, Mitchell called with the result. "Parole denied. She will be up for consideration again in 3 years." I felt relief wash over me. 3 more years before I had to think about this again. Life continued to get better. Jessica and I moved in together after 2 years of dating. She loved the cabin as much as I did, and she brought a warmth to the place that had been missing. We adopted a dog, a rescue named Copper, who was part golden retriever, part mystery. He became my constant companion, always alert to any unusual sounds or activity around the property. It was comforting to have him there. The HOA remained peaceful under Gerald's leadership. He eventually stepped down after 4 years, and Linda took over as president. The community had learned its lesson about giving too much power to one person, and the new bylaws prevented another Karren situation from happening. I stayed in touch with Mitchell, who had become a friend beyond just being my attorney. He occasionally sent me articles about HOA reform efforts in Colorado and across the country. There was a growing movement to increase oversight and accountability for homeowners associations to protect residents from exactly the kind of abuse I had experienced. 5 years after everything started, I was finally at peace. The cabin was truly my home again. The trauma had faded to the point where I could go days without thinking about what Karren had done. I had a career I loved, a partner who supported me, good friends, and a community that had learned to function the way communities should. One evening, Jessica and I were sitting on the porch watching Copper chase squirrels in the yard. The sunset was painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Are you happy?" Jessica asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I thought about the question. 5 years ago, I would not have been sure how to answer. But now? "Yeah," I said. "I really am," she smiled. "Good. You deserve it after everything you went through." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Jessica spoke again. "I saw that Karren is up for parole again next year. Are you going to submit a statement?" I'd been trying not to think about it, but yes, the 3-year mark was approaching. "Probably," I said. "I want to make sure the parole board knows she is still a threat." "I will support you however you want to handle it," Jessica said. When the time came, I did submit another statement. This one was shorter, just a reminder of what Karren had done and a request that she serve her full sentence. Once again, parole was denied. At this point, Karren had served 6 years of her 8-year sentence. She would be eligible for release in 2 more years, assuming good behavior. Part of me dreaded that day, worried about what she might do when she got out. But Mitchell assured me that the permanent restraining order would remain in effect and that any violation would send her right back to prison. She has to stay away from you and your property for the rest of her life, essentially, Mitchell explained. And given her record, any judge would take violations very seriously. She would be stupid to come after you again. She was stupid enough to move into my house in the first place, I pointed out. Fair point. But she's had 8 years to think about her choices. People can change. I was not convinced, but there was nothing more I could do except wait and see. Those 2 years passed quickly. Jessica and I got married in a small ceremony at the cabin, surrounded by close friends and family. Derek was my best man. Copper served as ring bearer, which was chaotic but adorable. We bought a second property, a small rental house in Boulder that provided some additional income. Life was full and good. When Karren's release date finally came, I was prepared. I had alerted the sheriff's office, had reviewed the restraining order terms with Mitchell, and had upgraded my security system yet again. But days passed, then weeks, then months, and there was no sign of her. I eventually learned through the grapevine that Karren and Richard had divorced while she was in prison, and that Richard had moved to Texas. Karren had been released to a halfway house in Denver and was reportedly working in a call center, trying to rebuild her life. She had not returned to Boulder, had not attempted to contact me, had not caused any problems. Maybe Mitchell was right. Maybe 8 years in prison had actually changed her. I decided to let it go. I stopped checking over my shoulder constantly, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. If Karren had learned her lesson and was moving on with her life, then I could do the same. 7 years after the initial break-in, I was finally able to tell the story without feeling angry or afraid. It had become simply something that happened, a difficult chapter that was now closed. The cabin was full of new memories, good ones. Jessica and I were talking about starting a family. The HOA was boring in the best possible way, handling road maintenance and little else. I sometimes thought about those early days coming home from Afghanistan to find a stranger in my house. I thought about the rage and violation I had felt, the exhausting legal battles, the fear. And I was proud of how I had handled it. I had not backed down. I had fought for my rights and my property. I had refused to be bullied or intimidated. And in the end, justice had been served. Karren had faced real consequences for her actions. The community had learned from the experience and made changes to prevent it from happening again. And I had my home, my peace, and my life. That was the real victory. Not the court case or the prison sentence, but the ability to sit on my porch with my wife and my dog, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, feeling safe and content in the place I called home. The HOA never bothered me again. The violations and harassment stopped the moment Karren was removed from power. Gerald and later Linda ran the association the way it should be run, with minimal interference in people's lives and maximum focus on actual community needs. The roads stayed paved, the common areas stayed maintained, and everyone was left alone to live as they pleased. I learned a lot from the experience about the importance of documentation, about knowing your rights, about the value of having a good attorney. I also learned about community, about how important it is for neighbors to speak up when they see injustice. If more people had pushed back against Karren's behavior early on, maybe things never would have escalated the way they did. But most importantly, I learned that home is not just a place. It is a feeling of safety and belonging. Karren had tried to take that from me, but she had failed. My cabin remained my sanctuary, my piece of peace in a chaotic world. And no one could take that away from me again. As I sat there on the porch, reflecting on everything, Copper came bounding up the steps and plopped down at my feet, panting happily. Jessica came out with fresh coffee for both of us. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how far we have come," I said. "How different things are now compared to 7 years ago." She nodded, understanding. We had talked about the Karren situation many times over the years. It had shaped both of us in different ways. You know what I realized? Jessica said. That whole nightmare led to so many good things. It brought you and Derek closer. It introduced you to Gerald and Dorothy and the other neighbors, and it led you to write your story online, which helped so many people. Even us meeting was indirectly related to it, since I first heard about you through the whole thing. I had never thought about it that way, but she was right. The worst experience of my life had somehow led to some of the best parts of my current life. It was a strange realization. I guess everything happens for a reason, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Or maybe you just made the best of a terrible situation, Jessica countered. You could have let it break you. You could have sold the cabin and moved away, let Karren win, but you fought back and you built something better. She was right about that. I had a choice in how to respond to what happened, and I chose to fight. Not everyone would have done that. Some people would have given up, would have found it easier to just walk away. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the mountains in crystal clarity. It was going to be a beautiful day. I had the day off work, and Jessica and I were planning to hike one of our favorite trails later. Simple pleasures, but they meant everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Hey man, meeting up with some folks at the brewery tonight if you and Jessica want to join. I showed Jessica the message. Want to go? Absolutely, she said. I texted back a confirmation and set my phone aside. This was my life now. Friends, family, peace, and security. Karren Edwards was nothing but a bad memory, locked away both literally and figuratively. The story could have ended so differently. If I had not had Derek checking on the property, if I had not been able to afford a good attorney, if the other HOA board members had not finally stood up to Karren, if the justice system had failed me, any number of things could have gone wrong, but they did not. Everything worked the way it was supposed to eventually. The legal system functioned. The community came together. Justice was served. It gave me faith, not just in the system, but in people. For every Karren Edwards out there, people who abuse power and hurt others, there are Gerald Fosters and Derek Johnsons and Mitchell Harrisons, people who stand up and do the right thing. I finished my coffee and stood up, stretching. Copper immediately jumped up, thinking we were going somewhere. Not yet, buddy, I told him. Later. Jessica and I went inside to start our day. As I closed the door behind me, I glanced back at the property one more time. My cabin, my land, my home. It had been a long, hard fight to keep it, but it was worth every second, every dollar, every moment of stress and fear. Because this was mine, and no one had the right to take it from me. The HOA had learned that lesson the hard way. Karren Edwards had learned it in prison, and I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it is hard, even when it is scary, is always worth it. That was the real moral of the story. Not that HOAs are inherently bad or that all people are terrible, but that you have to be willing to fight for what is yours. You have to be willing to stand up to bullies, to challenge injustice, to demand accountability. And when you do, when you refuse to back down, you can win. Not always, not easily, but you can win. I had won. My home was safe. My life was full. And Karren Edwards was nothing but a footnote in my history, a reminder of what I had overcome and how strong I had been. As I made breakfast with Jessica, as Copper begged for scraps, as I planned out the rest of my day, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had helped me. Gratitude for the justice system that had worked. Gratitude for the second chance to appreciate what I had. The cabin in the mountains, the woman I loved, the dog at my feet, the friends I would see tonight. This was everything I had fought for. This was why it mattered, and it was perfect.